Welcome to I Hate It Here, the podcast for HR and people professionals, making the hardest job in the world just a little bit easier. I'm Hebba Youssef.
When you and I have tensions, you tend to be very default to transparency with the team. When it clashes and we have tensions is when I feel like it goes against a narrative control that I want. And that is kind of an indicator, I think, of the perspective of our days of you think about how does our team feel with this happens? And I tend to think of what will our team think? And those are just different. They both matter a lot. You kind of have to butt heads in a way to create that. And I think the middle is the right way.
In the last 90 days, 3 little letters have been posted about in Safe Space community almost 200 times. CEO. And when I talk to HR folks, the number one complaint that comes up is the CEO. So today I'm bringing you a CEO to talk about why there's tension between HR and this role and how to actually build strong relationships with your CEO. But he's not just any CEO, he's my CEO. Wow, say CEO 5 times fast. I'm going to fuck that up at some point. He is the person I work the closest with at Workweek, and he's probably going to spill some tea about what it's like to work with me and give you the inside scoop on the CEO and CPO relationship. We're truly holding nothing back today. So Adam, welcome to the I Hate It Here podcast.
I've been looking forward to this for a year and a half. I'm so happy to be here.
And you get to see me be my corny creator self in real time, which I know you watch all the things I do, but this must just be a fun experience for you.
We'll get to you in a second, but it's going to be a little unpredictable of a podcast. I know.
I can't wait, and listeners definitely love it. Okay, but this season I'm asking every single guest, what's one thing a company could do that would make you want to quit? So I want to start there today before we get into the good stuff.
When a company has management and leadership that start to take actions that don't reflect who you want to be, the jobs I've quit, all of them have been when HR is why are you quitting? One time I was I don't want to become my boss. So why would I work for this person? I would rather make less money, do something totally different, start over than be mentored by someone that is going to train me in a way that I don't want to be trained. And I think when a company's management team doesn't match your own personal values, it's probably the number one reason that someone should leave.
I've definitely been there. I've quit because I didn't want to become my boss. I've also quit because there wasn't enough space between me and my boss, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And I felt I was doing already what they were doing. So I was why would I'm going to stay here and keep doing the job that you're also doing, but without the title, recognition, or compensation, what's the point?
Philosophically, we've talked about this a lot. I always think people leave a company for 3 things: culture, which is normally their manager, the teams they work with; value, which is what you just talked about; compensation, recognition. And I think those 2 things are table stakes. They're a little bit of a commodity. Anybody can do them if you just don't hire shitty people. But the last one, which is more cultural and much harder to do, is growth. The best employees normally don't leave because they don't get paid enough or they don't get recognition. They leave because they want more growth. And I think that also goes a little bit to what I said earlier is if you want to grow and become a manager and your manager is shitty, okay, I don't want to be trained by you.
Yeah, definitely not. Okay, now on to our questions. I'm really excited about these. I get excited at every guest, but I'm really excited about these because I feel you're going to tell me some things you wouldn't normally tell me. So my first question, and I have to ask this, what was your first impression when meeting me?
I thought you were fun. Our first conversation, we were just coming back from HR Transform. And I remember yesterday was a Friday afternoon. It was supposed to be an hour long. We talked for 3.
It's insane.
And I remember thinking you were fun. And then you talked about knowing all the lyrics to Ludacris and how you were pissed at the HR conference that everyone wasn't singing and dancing because you knew they knew the words, but they felt they couldn't. And I was that's so counter to main kind of narratives of HR. I fucking love that. And I think that's kind of who you are, is a little bit of the antidote of traditional HR. And that was kind of what my takeaway was and why we called you very shortly after and said, have you ever created content? You'd be good at this.
You might be good at this. It was a fun time. I mean, I do love Ludacris, and we are often called not fun. I think I told you this, like 2 places I have started in HR, and I've introduced myself, and the first comment somebody made in the chat or the Slack was, "Oh, HR's here. We can't have any more fun." 2 times that has happened to me.
Those were comments people were making before you started in our Slack. And I remember Becca responded to one of them. I was like, no, she's actually like a lot of fun, cheesy, but fun. And I think that's in a good way. But I think there's like that weird hard line of responsibility of like what is fun and what is not. But the thing that's actually what that is like relatable. And that was like really what you were in that conversation. It was like, we were totally, we were interviewing you for this role, and it was like, wow, you definitely got your very strong opinions across of things that you believed, but everything was just done in a very relatable way. And I think like that's what we wanted in somebody. It's just like someone that like, maybe you're not like, maybe some people aren't like crazy fun and big personalities, but like they just are relatable. And I think that's what's like needed.
We have to understand the employees and like what they're going through on a day-to-day basis. So hearing that you think I'm relatable is also just like core to being really good at this job, is like being able to relate to all those people that are also doing the work day in and day out. I never want to be too far detached from those people, because then I think I can't actually build a good experience for them.
It's why I think like having recruitment backgrounds into HR, like talent backgrounds into like leadership roles is actually really strong, because like if you've had to recruit for 10 different roles, you know how to like speak to 10 different roles, and it actually like pays off downstream of like understanding the comms of like, wow, this group of people very different than this group of people, and like that's like what's necessary to I think like actually communicate well.
I do agree with that. And now I get to share my word for you, because I feel like it's just necessary. Okay, my word for you was optimistic. When I met you, I was like in a very dark spot in my life. I was like really on the CEO hate train. I was like, every CEO is awful. They're going to be the worst people to work with. They're going to ruin my life. And I'm going to build them these beautiful companies. And no one's going to know behind scenes that I literally hate their guts. And I met you and I was like, wow, he's like really optimistic. And I have missed this energy in my life. And you told me that you wanted people to work at Workweek for 10 plus years. You're like, I want them to be here for as long as they possibly can, ideally like 10 years. And I remember thinking like, wow, that's wild. A lot of CEOs would be like, well, I don't really care. People leave, like talent should overturn and we should get new talent. And I think you were more like, we should build a really great environment where people don't want to leave. And it made me excited.
I have rose-colored glasses. I rear view optimism, all these other downsides of that optimism. But that optimism is like real. And I do want people to do this for 10 years. But I think it like, I always say that on first calls, because like that's a value of ours. And you can like weed people out pretty quickly. Like I actually don't mind if someone's like, hey, I'm going to use this first stepping stone of a career path. Like we can't have everyone grow with us forever. And I know that. But like at least someone knows where we're coming from and they know that. And it's like, okay. And I think long term, like the world is long, life is long. Like you make better businesses when people like actually for a long period of time can say nice things about you. And the flip side of that is, I need to surround myself with people that are like realists and like hold me accountable. And that's why we also brought on some of the people that we did as well.
Okay, so let's dig into this very elusive CPO CEO relationship. I wanted to record this episode with you because I hear from my friends in HR constantly about the complaints about their CEOs. I feel like I have a lot of tea about like every major CEO at this point in my life because I hear from their HR team so often. But in one word, how would you describe the relationship between CEO and CPO?
I think like traditionally, the word I would use is like fickle. It's like very emotional, where like some days CEOs look at HR and like, oh, they're like amazing. They helped me with this like thing and like, boom, it was great. We got this great person. That was such a cool event. Like they had like have like, and then like all of a sudden it's like, what the hell are they doing? Like, why are we doing this thing? And it was always like just very emotional. I don't know if it goes the other way, but I think like and I think it's just like fickle was a little bit it. And that's like when you walk around eggshells with anybody, all of a sudden, like you can't like actually have a core trust. And then that's like why I think everyone's like, fuck this, because there's no like real like where are you coming from like a trusted place? That's kind of like the issue traditionally. It's like, it's just like so emotional both ways. And I think it comes a little bit from like lack of not knowing the perspectives that every person's coming from.
A lot of CEOs like also just don't understand HR. I found that they think HR is one thing when really it's something very different, or like the role of HR has gotten so vast in the last 4 years that some CEOs think like you should be focusing on this part of it, and other CEOs are like, no, actually it's this part. And then we're kind of caught in the middle of, where do I actually need to focus my attention, because this specific person thinks that I'm supposed to be doing this, but in reality I do all these other things too.
Stage of company like matters, but like with us, when we hired you, like you had to be like a deep generalist. And this is how we viewed it, is like, hey, this person can be relatable. You know, you're also like the face of the business externally in so many ways. So like that's important as well. Like brand is not logos, it's people. And like that's important to like recognize like who you want in that role. And then the other aspect of it is like, does someone have a shitty attitude and you're like, hey, I gotta go figure this out with this contract, or go figure this thing out, that like, it's like, that's not a core skill set. Like no one can do finance, legal, recruitment, pay ops. Like, there's so many talent. There's so many things that like no one's going to be great at all those things. It's like impossible. That's also though where like the frustration comes in, is like, okay, some CPOs are like, yeah, I can do all these things. But then it's like, well, I love the attitude, but no, you're not good at these things. And then like as businesses scale, I think that's like that tension that happens naturally, is like, hey, yes, thank you, but no, that wasn't good. And I think like CEOs also are probably insecure and like going through the same things of like, I was good at this thing at this phase of the company, and I'm not good at that anymore. That change where people like on the people side, it's such a vast amount of responsibilities, especially for like upstarts and growing companies. It almost just sets the person up to not succeed. And that's like, well, what the hell, you know? And it's like, okay, anyway, that's the kind of my view of how that's unfolded with all these like growth of the responsibilities.
The fact that you said, like, I felt it in my soul that like you're set up to not succeed. I think a lot of people feel that way in HR and don't know how to actually be successful. And so then it like creates this tension between the CEO and HR, because we really want to be good at our job, right? Like no one shows up to work and is like, I want to be shitty today. We all show up to work and like, we want to be great. But then HR feels like we want to be great, but we never feel like we're set up to be great. Then it creates this tension with you. But like, do you think there's like a key to actually building that strong relationship with the CEO where HR doesn't feel like they're constantly set up to fail?
Consistent communication matters like a lot. So like if fickle is like where people used to be a little bit of this, and like how it can be in like a negative way, I think the way you overcome that is like you emotionally regulate by like having trusted, consistent communication that's like honest and upfront. And it like naturally will then have tensions, because that's what happens when you have trusted, consistent communication. There's something about a personality of a CPO across the board that what makes them great is that they have a pulse, and like they feel things, and they love to like they like see the thing that no one else sees, because they always are looking and they're always having the pulse. But then the flip side of that is like they love having the pulse. It's like their skill set. And I think then the hard line is like, hey, I don't want to give up this thing because like I have the pulse of that then, but I'm actually like fundamentally at this stage not good at this anymore. And I think that honesty is how you can like resolve that tension. And I think it's like a real thing. It's like when does like HR actually no longer like have the pulse of the company? And it's probably when they stop doing everything. And I think you could flip the same thing and say it to CEOs of like, hey, cool, you were great at this thing. Like you were the salesperson and now you're not. So get over it. But that transition is really difficult, and it kind of goes against the grain of a lot of people's skill sets. And then there's like also potentially ego involved in all that. And I think just like consistent communication of like, hey, this is tough. I don't want to like lose sight of this because it makes my job better. but doing this thing is not good either. I like don't know what I'm doing here, or like it takes me 10 times longer than if we like hired this person or did this thing. And I think like just like learning to grow and delegate those things through honesty and communication eliminates that tension. And there still might be tension of like, sorry, you fucking have to do that and get better at it. Or it's like, oh, wow, okay, well, then we're going to have to like hire this person. And that's like totally going to be, it's like, there's going to be hard solutions to those things. But I think as long as they're consistently communicated, it's just a lot easier.
Well, then, selfishly, I want to ask, like, where have you observed tension in our relationship? So we work together so closely. I think I probably talk to you more than I talk to anyone else at the company. And while we have a great relationship, we still have tension.
The biggest tension point we have is around company comms. And
I'm laughing.
Departures is definitely always the thing. And part of this might be my optimism, but I really like believe in the best things are, and I'm a former like context, I think a little bit about this. It was just kind of like, I don't think I've ever told you or said out loud, but like when I was a former teacher, and when I was teaching, my like mentors, like, look, the very best teachers, you don't believe that this lesson plan is structured. And you're like, dude, this was the coolest day of class ever. We did this thing and this thing and this thing. And you like, as a student, feel like you had this like freedom and like, it just like happened. And it was like so orchestrated so beautifully that it felt like seamless. And it's that's a really hard thing to do with curriculum. It's even harder to do with people in a company. But like, that's my perspective around communication, is like, it should feel very natural and authentic and organic. And it also should be like very controlled and orchestrated, because like this is a living species that if like not controlled can become out of control of like a business. Yes. So that's like my perspective. And I like very deeply believe I'm like also skilled at that. And then when you and I have tensions with departures, is you tend to be very like default to transparency with the team of like, this is like, hey, this is what happened. This is what it is. And it's our value. Default to transparency is like one of our values. And I like am on board with that. But like when it clashes and we have tensions is when I feel like it goes against a narrative control that I want. And that is kind of an indicator, I think, of the perspective of our days of like, you think about how does our team feel with this happens. And I tend to think of like, what will our team think? And like, those are just different. And like, they both matter like a lot, but that's like, we've had some pretty heated back and forth. And I think the reality is like, there's really like a middle ground there where I realize sometimes, and we've like got this feedback from staff when we went with my way, is like, hey, what the hell? I didn't know this thing. And then we've had conversations around suggestions you've had like, hey, that's going to probably like ruffle too many feathers. It's like too far that way. And like, you kind of have to butt heads in a way to like create that. And I think like the middle is the right way with our relationship. But yeah, it doesn't just happen at like, boo boo, let's do it. It's normally a couple like,
we go back and forth.
Stubborn opinions going at it.
We both have strong opinions.
Yeah.
I love conflict, Adam. Like we've talked about it. Like I was like, what? I love conflict. What? Like I want to debate this shit, and I want us to like. And the thing is, like sometimes I am very stubborn. I've acknowledged that about myself quite a bit, and I need to learn to just like let go and try it a different way, which I have worked on. I feel like quite a bit in the last year, but I like the tension because I think it gets us to better solutions in the end. And like the more I have conflict with you, it actually helps me because then I can better anticipate what you are going to want in the future. And I know that like sounds counterproductive. Like usually we both want the same things. We just have different approaches of getting there. And so like the more I can not argue with you, because I don't think that sounds very healthy, but the more I can really get a chance to like see how you think and how you approach things, then the better I get at like actually predicting how the work needs to be done so that you are bought in and aligned.
Well, I think that's why like the consistent communication matters, because like, you know, my whys a lot. And I think like where this relationship like sours and everything is ruined, and I've seen this in past companies, is when it's like this is what we're doing, do it. And there's no why, there's no purpose. And of course, there's no like collaboration. And like, that's like the death of the relationship, I think, between the two roles. And I think there's also, this is like this is for you. I don't know if everyone thinks this way, but you'll probably have a bunch of people shaking their head yes. But like, you always bring up like, hey, legally, we should watch this. And like, we should pay attention to this thing. And like, we can't. And I'm like, I don't give a fuck about that. And I'm like, if we get caught by the government as a 25-person company, like, okay. And, you know, I think like it's really fair. But like, I think when we had like tension at first around that, I was like, I don't understand why she's bringing this up. Like, we are a year-old startup. There's like no. And then your responsibility from your perspective is like, I am doing like risk management of our people and our team and like making sure that we're doing the right things that set us up for the long term. And I have like, I'm making sure we don't run out of cash. And we came to whys and like sometimes like, hey, this is better to do now versus like, sorry, we're just going to fly under the radar for a little while for that one. And like, for like knowing the why between that versus if I'm like, no, we're not doing that. And it's like, what the fuck? Well, what? And it's like, instead of I'm like, hey, we have very limited resources right now. I fundamentally don't think that puts us in like a death risk scenario for the next 12 months. Do you agree? And it's like, yeah, actually, it's fine for like a year. It's like, cool, table it.
Move on. Yeah.
And I think that why is like so critical because like our perspectives are different.
I mean, I feel like everyone needed to hear that too, because there's so much disagreement that comes with this role. I do feel like I honestly, at least once a week, somebody asks me on how to handle their CEO when they're like really trying to get a point across to them. And I always come back to like, you have to understand their perspective. Right? Because like I'm approaching the work from a decade plus of doing the work a certain way. And you also are approaching it from like, I need to make sure this business continues to thrive and like grows and survives. Those are two very different perspectives. And usually, like what you said, where we get to is somewhere in the middle.
There's a whole different side of this. Like you mentioned earlier, like you were tired of helping build these businesses that like no one would know because you were in the background. Most CEOs are terrified of failing, no matter the confidence that they may come off as and the optimism that they have, right? And also, and I'm not saying that they don't deserve this, they do, but like if it fails, it's their fault. In the same way, if there's a success, they kind of get the credit, probably a little unfairly in that way too. It like goes both ways. And I think there's like this tension sometimes, I think, for big decisions. Like we reduced headcount last November. There was a lot of conversations we had around that about how to go about that process. And like, I had multiple feelings of like, if this goes wrong, I'm the fucking one who gets canceled. And there has to be like a perspective there of like, and it's not always true, but like, I do want to be the last person to sign off on this because like, it is my personal reputation that could get ruined on like a downside. And I think like, way more CEOs are in like dark places like that all the time than they probably will ever share because like that's not what they want people to like think of them as. But I do think that like perspective can really help of like, sometimes it's not necessarily like their fucking ego is online. It's like they have like this like huge fear of being ridiculed. And the only way to overcome that fear is control. And so then, you know, you've done this before, but it's like, instead of like immediately being like, hey, I think that's wrong. It's like, hey, can you just tell me like what the perspective is here? And like learning a little bit of like what that is and asking not like first layer, but second and third layer questions. Then you can actually become like the thought partner of like, oh, I didn't know that. Well, like, just so you know, we could do it this way. That could help that. And like, if you have an open-minded CEO, they're going to appreciate that. But it's like that deeper layers, I think, that needs to like be asked at first to really build that trust up.
I think, and I don't know if you'd be surprised with this, but I actually think like, while I understand it's like your company and your legacy, I think a lot of people also carry a deep responsibility for the people at the company.
Yes. Like the internal, literally like parental, like I committed it as the face of the company, right? I just said that to you. Like you're the first call in the recruitment process. Now, like if something goes wrong, it's like, well, I didn't live up to what I said. And I think that's like very, very real. And if like someone doesn't realize that, It's not like a emotional switch of like, oh, it's fine. I just like convince this person to quit their job, change their life. And then like we fuck them over 6 months later. It's like have a little bit of empathy on that side too.
I think for HR people, and I've been thinking about this a lot recently, I feel like we start almost from the negative with a lot of employees because so many people have had bad experiences at work. And like you see it all over the internet, it's all over TikTok, it's all over Twitter. Everyone hates their HR team. And so I think the other thing that is constantly plaguing us as we're navigating these relationships is we start from the negative with so many people. And so the other responsibility that I wish more CEOs would appreciate, and I know you do, is I'm already fighting something that's like not good. Like people already think I'm like the not fun legal person who's going to fire you and ruin your life. And so I'm already trying to fight that and also do this like really great work to set them up for success. And so I think like in the same way that CEOs are fearful of their legacy and reputation, we're just trying to get to a positive place with employees a lot of the time. And it's exhausting.
It's really funny. I just interviewed and talked to somebody in like a finance CFO role. And I was like, hey, tell me the thing that goes on in this role that like you've gone through doing this job for 15 years that like not being this role, I don't know. And you said people hate HR, or HR people hate their job, which is how we got to the brand name later, which is amazing. But funny enough, the CFO person was like, I'm literally the person that carries the casket always. Like I always deliver the like deathly bad news of like, no, you can't spend that. You can't do that. Like I am the no person. Like it ends with me. And if it's a yes, the manager, the CEO, everyone who gets to spend gets to the yes. And I always have to say the no. I'm the bad guy, like notoriously the bad guy. And he's like, it's actually like really hard because like you inevitably have a hard time building relationships. And I thought about that conversation a lot of like, well, if the CEO would do that instead, then that person wouldn't have to do that. Like, hey, no, I said no. What it is like, and I think this is like fundamentally at the core of HR too, but I think finance it applies to, is like traditionally those roles have meant to protect the CEO's reputation internally and externally. And so they just take the brunt of everything. And I do think that actually does matter. Like Disney is not Disney without Bob Iger. No one knows who the CFO is and it doesn't matter. There are like CEOs that become like a superpower of the brand that then like the company and the brand are almost the same person. And like that's a special place to be. And the people that pay for that is then those next level, HR and like finance and these other places. And I think like as a CEO, if you're going to be that way, if you think you have to be in this like halo position, which is like a strategy, then like just say that out loud to the team and be like, this is part of your responsibility. I just want you to know that now, versus like acting like they get to like, oh, you like, we're killing you. You're like, yeah, I deal with all your shit because you don't have to deliver bad news. You can deliver all good news. And I think like a good route there is like balancing those like negative comms when you can and like letting, you know, if you're in HR, like finding the moment where it's like, hey, maybe you deliver this one because like it's okay. It actually is a good thing. It is bad news. It is tough, but like there's like actually will be increased trust because if you take accountability and transparency, like, and I think that's like the thing that a modern relationship between like an executive team, I think it's more about like, hey, how do we kind of like balance this like delivery of brand and like reputational control of communication style where it's not just like the CEO is the halo and doesn't have to do anything. And like, I think that's kind of like always been the issue in the past.
I will say you do a good job at Workweek of communicating hard news. You don't make me do it all. And I like deeply appreciate that because I think that's just like respectable as our CEO. Like sometimes you have to talk about a mistake we made or a time that we were wrong about something. And I think it goes so far. So like personally, I'm grateful that you do that and you don't just say, Hebba, you have to be the person to communicate all the bad news because that would be sad for me.
I think like if individuals in the company can trust me through bad and good news by having consistent communication and being it's actually better. And like, there's a lot of hard conversations you and I have before I have to deliver those bad news or whatever. But like, I think it's actually like a modern way to like lead the company in like still having it's not a halo anymore of like this person's perfect. It's like this person like is someone that like I trust. And that's like what is the shift of like what's going on, because people know no one's perfect anymore. So like trying to make it seem like that way is like not going to work.
Yeah, it's like unauthentic, and authentic was like the word of the year last year. So I think more people are seeing through like the business comms, and they're just looking for like, who is the human who's trying to do the thing, and do I like this person or not?
It also like, but like, I'm not going anywhere.
Kidding.
One day someone will fire me, but like for now I'm okay. And there's no guarantees of anything else, because like it's not the company that those people start and what they do. And so for me, if you like want to have someone work there for 10 years, having a consistent person that they can rely to hear from matters. And, there's downsides and plus sides. I know I've like sent emails that we've talked to like probably other companies' HR would have sent those actually. And I'm like, I actually would prefer to send that. That is because I think like I know the highest probability of someone being here in 10 years is me. And I think having everyone hear from someone consistently, it creates safety and then creates trust, and that allows them then to stay longer. And that's like a big part of that. And, you get blows and you get pushback and like, but it's just like part of the piece.
Yeah. I mean, like, hopefully you're going to be here for a very long time, Adam. I would hope. I genuinely like working with you. I feel like we have one of the better working relationships that I've possibly ever had at work. Like we have a healthy amount of discourse and healthy conflict in our relationship. But I do feel like after working with you that I've like become a better leader and HR person. So
nice.
I hope you stay for a little bit. Yeah. I mean, also you just like, you drive me nuts sometimes, but like, that, like,
yeah, I mean,
I've told you on days where I'm just like, please, Adam.
Drive everyone nuts. So it's not you, it's everyone. Hey, it's me.
I drive you. Yeah.
It's me.
No, it's me.
Yeah, it's me. Yeah. I think like also you've made it easy of like, you're self-aware. And I think like this is like the hard piece that I told you from the first day that you started when you were writing your newsletter. I was like, I won't ever judge you of what you write. You can write whatever you want. And I'm not going to like get in the way of Workweek. I like want you as a creator to do that. And that was like very important for me to tell you that. But I actually think it's like allowed this unique relationship where like I know who you are and like you are self-aware enough. And then I know like your strengths and weaknesses. And I actually think like most HR people know the CEO's strengths and weaknesses, but most CEOs don't know their HR strengths and weaknesses. And like the more that is known, the more that like relationship can actually form and be like, oh, this is when I want to absolutely have you do this because you'd be way better at this than me. First, like, hey, I think I have this piece. But like asking a CEO, like, hey, what do you think my strengths and weaknesses are? Like as a human, I think most would be like, you're really nice. Like, it's like dumb. Like, listen, pay attention.
You have given me the grace to be good at things and bad at things. And some HR people don't have that freedom too. So like, I do feel very privileged on the average day that like, I can be snarky to you and I want to be. And a lot of HR people can't. So like, that's the other thing too. And I think like, and a defining moment for me in our relationship, Adam, and I didn't tell him I was going to share this, but I am going to share this now. A defining moment for me in our relationship was like one of our earliest conflicts we had. I don't even think you'll remember this, but it was very early on. We like had a discussion about something and we like left the conversation like really good. Like we both talked live. It was really great. Later on that same day, you called me and you were like, hey, I just wanted to take some time out of my day to call you and just say like, thank you for sharing your thoughts with me earlier today. I know that's not always easy, but I really appreciate when you do that. And like after that day, Adam, I was like, whatever this man wants me to do, I'll do it. Like he at least has the grace.
Conversation at all, but
you don't. And it was a defining moment in my career.
I love that.
Because I was like, at least this person cared enough about me to like have a disagreement and then follow back later in the day to say thank you for feeling comfortable and safe with me to tell me that I might be wrong in that thought I had. And I don't know. I think it said a lot about you. And I think it really did set the foundation for our relationship to stay really strong. Okay, so last question, because I feel like I want people to take away, obviously we've talked about a lot of great stuff, but just one takeaway as they're walking away. Do you have any advice for HR leaders that are working to strengthen their relationship with their CEO? What they could possibly do?
We touched on a couple of these things here. I think like creating consistent communication channels and like that not being like, hey, update, here's the recruitment, but like, hey, this is like a challenge in the business I'm seeing. Do you see that? I think like that, like, and just like trying to create more honest, vulnerable, and like, honestly, most CEOs are like kind of argumentative naturally. They're obviously egotistical is why they get to the position they're in. I think like there's like a respect there of like, hey, I'm just going to like get in the ring with you for a second here, not to hurt you, but to like actually improve your sharpness in this and like give you a different perspective. And like, that's what you did that day. And anybody that's like not an asshole is going to like be like, damn, I appreciate that. The next one is like a little empathy. Like I do think, there's no HR for HR, but like there's no one for the CEO to go to at all. And that does create loneliness and fear and frustration. And like, if you asked who the loneliest people in the company are to like a company survey, no one would say the CEO, right? Like, it's just like not how people see that role. And I think like having empathy around that of being like, hey, I know we have this tough decision up. It's not even my thing, but can I like help you at all? Or like, hey, have you thought about like, we make everyone else take a vacation. Have you thought about doing that? Like just, well, hello, it's me again. I think that's like having empathy of like treating them like a person, I think goes a really, really far way. And then I think the last one is like modeling that behavior. Like we are stubborn, right? Like we do like have our ways. Also like, old dog, new tricks, like hard, right? Like, hey, we got to this place. We're having this sort of success in this way. I did it this way before. Why would I do it differently now? Like, obviously that's a dangerous attitude to have, but like the reality is it's how a lot of people operate with people. If you want to like change behavior, you need to start modeling it like on your own and in the way that you manage up and the way you manage down and like you manage yourself. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, just so you know, like this is like what I did. And I think like nothing can grab the attention of a CEO more than like progress and success. And then like being like, this is how I did this. And it's like, oh shit, we should probably do that. And it's like, yeah, I know. And so I'll always like kind of treat yourself, I think, as like the model of the behavior that you want to have and make them notice if they refuse to by being stubborn.
I love that. That's a lot of really good advice. I want to end the episode there because I think you gave us a lot to think about. And we talked deeply about like how to actually build the strong relationship, because I think just like CEOs are lonely, so is HR. So
it's why we talk to each other all the time, Hebba.
It's why we talk. It's literally why you're the person I slack the most in this world.
That and Taylor Swift, but
that Taylor Swift. Yes.
Well, thank you for having me on. I've been waiting for this day. I'm honored that you had me. Thank you for all that you do at Workweek and also for helping everyone else in this industry. I think you make the HR world a little bit better of a place and they don't hate it as much.
There we go. There's the ending. We don't hate it as much. Okay, wait, Adam, you have to tell people how to get in touch with you because I ask every guest. If people are like, I love this guy, I want to know more about him.
I'm on LinkedIn. I also have a podcast called Perpetual where I mostly just talk about the media industry if you're in that industry. And then I'm also on Twitter, Adam R_AN. And yeah, you find me there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adam. Thanks for tuning in. Keep up with all the latest HR resources by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And if you love I Hate It Here, tell an HR friend. I'll see you next time.